Hey guys, it's Will here, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, got a painting tutorial for you, and as you can see, I'm going to be painting this Stormcast Eternal. Wanted to do this for a number of reasons. Firstly, got quite a unique colour scheme here. It is one that GW suggest, but one that I haven't really seen many Stormcasts painted in. And it's a little bit tricky to find the right colours for this, I found, but I think I found a combination that's going to work, so I'm going to show you what that's going to be in a minute. Also wanted to do a painting tutorial to show or to test out my new Citadel painting handle here. Not used a painting handle before, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So the colour scheme I'm going to be doing is the Astral Templars. Now these are a very feral storm host. I don't think it specifically says they're all like taken from the realm of beasts, but they're quite almost bestial storm hosts. I mean, still very much, you know, a loyal force of order, but, you know, guys who are more at home in the wilderness than in cities. So, yeah, going to be painting them up. And they've got this quite sort of dark red, but sort of fading into slightly purple sort of colour scheme, and it took me a while to find a colour that would be right for them, and I've been looking to do this colour for something else as well, and now that I found one I thought it'd be quite nice to show you. So the first thing we need for this colour scheme is actually Screamer Pink, and I think this is why it took me so long to find this, because the normal suggested highlight colours for Screamer Pink are then Pink Horror and Emperor's Children. And to be honest, I felt like if I painted a Stormcast or anything else in those colours, it would only really look sort of like pink, basically. But I think I found a way that I can still utilise certainly the Screamer Pink to actually make a model that still looks like it's a dark crimsony red, without, you know, go into that sort of overly pink, almost like Emperor's Children Slaneshi type look. So I'm going to start off with the Screamer Pink here. You know, when I first looked at this colour scheme, I was thinking about doing the base in perhaps corn red, but that was sort of too red. This is kind of more of a purpley red. And I'm just going to paint this over all the areas of the armour and the shield that are going to be this colour. As you can see, I've base coated him in black, so I'm almost certainly going to need 2 thin coats for this. And this doesn't quite look as pink in reality as it's looking on the camera right now. The light, the way it's shining, certainly makes it look very sort of bright pink. And we're not going for like almost an effeminate sort of pink here. We're going for more of a regal crimson type of look. And as I say, we're going to dull this down a little bit with a couple of carefully applied ink washes in a bit. But at this stage, it doesn't matter too much if this is a little bit messy, because we're going to come back and neaten up all the other areas in a bit. So just want to be applying this with a decent sort of size brush over all the areas of the armour that are going to be this colour. Once that's dry, we can start shading this guy, and the first colour I'm going to be using for that is Sharaborg Crimson. So the aim here is more to make the model redder, you know, more red and less pink. You know, we don't want to quite go to corn red, so you don't want to do this too heavily, but you want just enough to really sort of stain the armour. It's sort of a closer to red colour, kind of like a halfway house between this Screamer Pink and the more sort of the true reds like corn red. And so we're not sort of applying this too roughly. If you find you've probably got a bit too much on there, then just wipe your brush off and use the now fairly dry brush to dab extras out. We are going to do a second shade on this, so we really don't want to go over the top at this stage, or you make the recesses too dark. Plus, excessive use of shading can sometimes leave the model looking a little bit too wet, even once it's dry. So I'm going to finish this off over the whole model, just a nice even shade of this. Once that's completely dry, I'm giving this a second shade, this time with Agrax Earthshade. Now this time around, you want to be a little bit, you want to be sparing as well. I've actually added a little bit of water to my palette with this, rather than using the shade pure, just to stop it becoming too thick, because too thick a shade and you will basically just turn this into corn red. the aim here is to cover it all over, but not a really heavy shade, just allowing it to settle in the recesses, and the top bit, the top sort of layer, really just helping to keep the tone rather than really making it too dark. I don't know if I'm making much sense there, but the point is it's just a fairly thin shade, just allowing the recesses to be darkened down. Here it's pulled a bit too much again, so I'm just taking the paint off my brush and just using my brush almost like a sponge to get that up, and doing this over the whole area of the armour again. A lot of painting tutorials would then show you how to highlight the armour, but personally I prefer to do some of the other details and then come back and do the edge highlighting and layering on the armour later on. So first thing I'm going to do is the metallic parts, and this is going to be my standard metallic scheme. So we're starting off with lead belcher, just applying that down here to the tabard, and also up to the hammer and the side sword there. I'm neating that up off camera, and then we're going to give that an ink wash. And for that ink wash we're using Nuln oil, so just popping this over all of the silver metallic parts of the model, being careful at this stage not to start getting it onto any of the areas we've already done in the red colour, because you don't want to ruin what you've already done. And once that's had a chance to dry, we're just giving it a quick dry brush with Runefang Steel. That was a little bit too much, just to bring out the detail, lighten it up, make it look shiny and metallic. The next area of detail we're going to work on is any of the areas that want to be this sort of light bony sort of colour, and for this we're using a Shabty bone, and there's two main areas we want to do with this. First is the loincloth edges down here, so being careful not to get it on the metallic parts, and also this sort of like oath paper, whatever this is meant to be called in Age of Sigmar. I want to call it a purity seal, but it's not. It's like obviously not, because it's not Warhammer 40k. But yeah, doing that, just being careful not to get it on the details you've already done. This will probably take 2 thin coats to get these details done. I was right, that did take 2 thin coats, and as you can see I've also done the belt and the back of the loincloth as well. And then we're going to give that a shade in Seraphim Sepia, the pretty standard shade I would use for this, getting into all the recesses there. Shows up particularly nicely on these Stormcast models, on these like parchment bits here, because all the lettering on there, it goes right into the recesses. So yeah, one single coat of this over all of those areas, and once that's dry we'll come back and highlight it. The highlight for this first is a Shabty bone, so just getting a little bit of that on my brush, and for the loincloth and the other fairly smooth areas you just want to just layer it in a pretty normal way, just leaving the darker colour in the recesses. But for the like this parchment bit on the side, you kind of actually want to overbrush, so it's kind of like dry brushing but heavier, so you leave more paint on your brush than you would if you were dry brushing, but less than if you're layering. And you can see here that as I'm dragging that across, that's still leaving the recessed details in the darker colour. Oh, hang on, if I can get that lined up, there we go. But the raised surfaces are getting the lighter colour there, so it's helping to bring that, and it's much easier doing it that way than doing it with trying to like highlight that in a conventional way. Although for like the bigger areas like the loincloth here, you do want to just do a conventional highlight, just switching between brushes depending on which bits you're doing. Then I'm switching to a lighter bone colour. This is Screaming Skull, but I'm only going to apply this to the tassel over here, the parchment, and that is more of a dry brush at this stage, so not even worrying about going into this fold here. We're just catching the raised parts of the model. Great if it would focus, that would be good. We are going, this colour isn't much lighter, to be honest, than a Shabty bone, so it's good for doing this kind of fade effect, but for actually highlighting, we're going to just add a bit of white to this before we start highlighting these other areas. Actually, saying that, there is one other area I'd like to use Pure Screaming Skull in, and that is as a highlight on the raised bits here, the front of the loincloth. It's too small an area to worry about really layering. You just want to do one increased layer and then an edge highlight, but on the back here, much more area to cover, so we can go a bit more of a graduated effect. So we're doing a bit of this before we add the final highlight. Oh well, I've got a little bit onto the armour there, and that, that happens. So I'm just going to wash my brush off, then get a little bit of relatively clean water on there and just flood the area, then get an older brush that's dry and just scoop it all up like that, and there we go. Quick little thing on fixing your mistakes as well. And on this red armour here, to be honest, it wouldn't have been the end of the world because we're going to go back and layer that anyway. But, sometimes you do need to neaten up as you go, and that will do the job nicely there. So then I've mixed up a 50-50 approximate mix of Screaming Skull and White Scar, because I find that Screaming Skull is a little bit too close to a Shabty Bone in terms of colour to get a really good highlight. So I'm going to turn the model upside down for this bit. And just highlighting across there. All just the raised parts of this tabard here are going to be the first place. And also, if my camera will focus, the edges of the belt. The shield does get in the way a little bit of this, so you just have to turn the model to get around it. Edge highlighting on camera is really fiddly. The other thing I'm going to do, once I've washed off that brush, is just get my the brush I tend to use for sort of smaller areas of dry brushing, and dry brush a bit of this onto this parchment area as well, just to give it another layer of highlighting. Dry brushing, you can really sort of go with multiple layers much easier than layering. There we go, wash that off, and then I will just finish off highlighting the back of the model as well. Some of the highlighting I will finish on camera. The light is reflecting really badly. Let me see if I can adjust that. There we go, that's better. You need a good light to paint in, but sometimes the camera picks it up a little bit too much, especially when you've got light surfaces next to dark surfaces. So just going down the most raised parts of this. Finish the belt and the front of the loincloth off on camera, and then I'll show you the next step. The next step is to paint all the armour joints, and for that we're starting off with Eshin Grey, and there's a few visible on the front, but to be honest, most of them, the big ones, are at the back. So just painting that into there. This should go down in one thin coat, because Eshin Grey, although it is a layer, is quite a dark colour, and we're working over not an especially dark colour. So we're getting it into all of those recesses there. So although I'm showing it on the back of the model, there are a few of these on the front. They're just a bit fiddlier, and these ones are easier to get to, so I'm going to do them first and do the other bits off camera. Once those areas are dry, we're just going to give them a quick wash with Nuln Oil. And as you can see, that's really bringing out the detail in the recesses there. You don't want to use too much of this because it can sometimes almost leave a wet effect even when it's dried if you overdo it, even if you haven't accidentally picked up the other gloss version. So it's just got a little bit on there, so I'm just going to wipe that with my finger and redo that. Just give that a chance to dry before you start anything else. You know, drying times on these washes depends a little bit on the weather, but it can be anything up to half an hour, so better to make sure it's fully dry before trying to do anything else with it. Once that's fully dry, we're going to want to highlight these areas, and the first colour for that is just going back to Eshin Grey, so we're relayering up to the colour we had originally. So just on the raised areas, using a brush with a good point on it. Doesn't necessarily need to be a very thin brush, just a brush with a good point, so the deeper areas can stay in the darker colours, but the more raised areas you're picking out in this. And you just want to go around and do this on all of the armour joints on the front and the back. And then we're going to finish those areas off with Dawnstone. And for this I am using a very thin brush because you can go a little bit over the top with this and have it looking too light. You don't want the areas to really be focal points on the model, but you do want to make it look like you've made an effort and picked out the raised detail. So just very carefully highlighting the raised surfaces in here. So that's all done now, and we can focus back on the front of the model, and we're looking this time at this tabard here, these like tassely bits. And for this I'm going to do Abaddon Black first for the base coat. These are going to be black, so we want a nice even base coat of Abaddon Black. At this stage, with more and more of the details being already complete, you want to make sure to apply this carefully so as not to ruin what you've already done. And then we're going to highlight that in much the same way as we did the armour joints. So starting off with Eshin Grey, and quite a heavy highlight of this one, because it's quite similar in colour to the black once it's dried, and you really just want to leave the black in the recesses and this on the more raised areas. And then going back to Dawnstone for the fine edge highlight on those, much finer on this using that small brush again. Incidentally, with this, what you could do is after you've done the ink wash on the armour joints, you could then, you know, do all the Eshin Grey parts and then all the Dawnstone parts, but I chose to show it separately because I'm showing each part of the model individually. Okay, and you can see that's all done now. Next bit to do is the gold armour, and generally gold trim on the armour. Normally with Stormcast, when I do gold, I go Retributor armour and then wash it and re-highlight, but with this case, because it's only trim, washing it could actually mess up what I've already done on the other areas, so I'm going to instead go for Warclock Bronze as a darker base coat. And I'm just going to be doing this on all of the gold areas, of which there are quite a few. You've got the detail on the shield and also the rim of the shield, places like the edges of the shoulder guards here. And then you've got this halo up here. I'll finish these off properly. I'm just showing you where they need to go to start off with. Finish these off properly off camera. And the other effect this is going to have, because it's got a slightly darker finish with this very dark base colour, it's going to give it, I don't know, just more of an edgy type of look. It's not going to be the shiny gold you get on a I think the Hammers of Sigmar. It's going to represent more this kind of bronzy gold that you can expect to see on this army that is based in and around the realm of beasts. Once we've got a nice even layer of that over all of the gold areas, including some of the bits I may not have pointed out, like the trimming of the sword sheath, things like that, we're going to go in with Retributor armour and start to highlight this. Now, exactly how we're going to highlight this varies a little bit on different parts of the model. So on the shield, we're actually going to start with an overbrush. So I've removed some of the paint from this brush, and we're just trying to catch all the raised parts and just leave the recesses darker. Now, I'm probably going to get 2 coats of this to get a really nice look on that, but you can see now that the darker colour is, you know, showing through, but we're bringing out the highlights in this. And as we get to some of the sharper details, like this hammer here on the shield, painting that more than overbrushing it, being very careful not to get it in the recess details. There's quite a bit of this to do, so I'm just going to go around and do the whole model off camera. Obviously on like the belt buckle here, you want to leave the indented part, and as we've done really everything apart from the main sort of pinky red colour on this stage, you really do want to be quite careful not to get this over anything else. Again, this halo up here is an area you can overbrush more really than paint. You're kind of halfway between, just trying to catch the raised areas again and leave the recesses looking a bit darker. So all the gold on this model is now layered up, and I did have to go over it a second time in some areas just to make sure I got the best coverage over that rather dark base coat. But now we're going to highlight this. So this is going to be mostly an edge highlight using Liberator Gold. So just going around the whole model, catching the raised highlights. Now, for this scheme, I'm going to do a double-edged highlight. So to start with, we're going Liberator Gold, and then we're going to go lighter. So you want to leave, you know, a little bit of this, enough room so that you can then hit it with a second thinner edge highlight, rather than going for just an ultra-fine edge highlight that you then can't really do anything beyond. So yeah, going over this like that, going around the whole model is going to take quite a while, but just take your time, persevere. I personally find edge highlighting quite therapeutic, although I know a lot of people find it a bit laborious. So yeah, there's quite a lot to do, so I'll finish that up off camera and come back and show you when it's done. So that's done now on all the gold areas of the model, and they're starting to shine a bit more now. But then we want to give it the second edge highlight, and that's going to be in Stormhost Silver. So going in with a smaller brush this time and just catching the highest raised areas, places like the top of the shield, like in these details. Just want to do like the top part of it. And less is more with this. You're really just almost trying to paint on the where the metal would shine, as opposed to really a full-blown extra layer of colour. You're just picking out the bits that you want to be really extra shiny. So just look like the top of this half moon shape here, pommels of the weapons, corners of the shoulder guards, really to make it shine more than to make it look silver. Yeah, I'll finish that up off cam and then we'll show you the next part. So with that done, you can see the gold is looking nice and shiny, and we're almost there. We've just got to do one final detail before we start to highlight the main body of the armour, and this is going to be this little like lightning design in the middle of the shield by the hammer there. So I'm going to do 3 colours for this. I'm going to start off by basing it in Dawnstone, and then layering up with Ulthuan Grey, and then a final highlight in White Scar. So I've already got some Dawnstone on my palette here, and just going to come in and paint all of the white area here, or the area that is going to be white. At this point we are being very careful not to start ruining the what we've already done on the shield, so just take your time on this, and then once that's done we're going to go back and give that a highlight. So as I said, the highlight's going to be Ulthuan Grey. So we're just going to paint that over again, the whole design, except we're leaving the deepest recesses, which on this kind of raised design, it's actually around the edges, just so you can see that there's some depth to this. There we go. So yeah, you can see there's a little bit of the Dawnstone showing through there, but the majority of it is coming out in this much lighter Ulthuan Grey. I've had to dim the light and turn off the flash for this last bit, because where it was so bright, the Ulthuan Grey and my next highlight, White Scar, were looking very similar, but they are different enough that you can use one to highlight the other. So we're using the White Scar here just for a very thin highlight across the top here, and you can see how that is different. That would have been washed out if I'd left the light on. So yeah, normally I recommend using a light to paint. It's just the way the camera picks it up doesn't work. This is just a very thin top highlight on that. I have to turn him upside down to do the other side, so I'll do that off camera, and then we'll show you how to highlight the actual main armour. Alright, so that's done now. You can see the highlight there, and I can turn the light back onto the model and just get that to refocus. And then we're going back in with the original base colour, the Screamer Pink. So before we had base coated him in Screamer Pink and then applied 2 ink washes, first of Cherubor Crimson and then of Agrax Earthshade. And we want that kind of washed out colour to be the main colour of the armour. So this is mostly going to be an edge highlighted layer. So we're going round, the shield's probably the easiest place to show it, but you're doing this all over. Just catching the raised edges. And like we did with the gold, this is going to be 2 layers of edge highlight. So the first one is back into that original base coat. So you want a reasonable amount of that, because we're going to add a second coat in a moment. I'm going to show you how it sort of goes on the body here. So you're just catching the edges of all these raised armour panels and leaving that dark colour in the recess. This is going to allow you to get that kind of crimson sort of look to it, without actually having to make him go too pink, which is what would happen if I actually layered all of these armour panels completely in this. So I'm going to go around and do the whole model, and then show you the final highlight. So that first highlight is already helping to bring out the three-dimensional nature of this model, but we are going to finish this off with one final highlight, and that is going to be with this colour here, Pink Horror. Now this does look like quite a bright pink, so we're going to be very careful with applying this. So I'm using the finest brush I get hold of, which is a Citadel Artificial Layer brush, and making sure that there is a good amount of water added to the paint so it flows nicely, and just very carefully applying this over the most raised areas of the panel, of all the armour panels. So you're leaving some of the Screamer Pink visible, and this is just a very fine edge highlight. And this does take a little while to do because you just want to be very careful with it, but I find, hang on, if I can get the model onto camera that would help, that this just helps to really make the model pop and give it that three-dimensional look. To be honest, there is almost too thick. I think I might go back and redo that off camera. These edges here though are particularly nice to catch. You just turn the model, just catch the very raised edge of it like that. So I'm going to finish the rest of that finish the rest of that up off camera, and apparently learn to talk again, and then I'll show you the finished thing. So that's all done now, and as you can see, he's looking pretty good. This final highlight has really helped to make the edges of the armour stand out, and just helps to give this nice sort of crimson colour, so it doesn't look like a true red, but it also doesn't look like a very effeminate pink, you know. So I'm pleased with this, but I am just going to quickly base him because generally models just look better with the base done. So I'm going to do that and show you the finished product. Okay, so my Stormcast is all based up now, and as you can see I've done a fairly kind of generic wilderness scene with just a bit of rock and a little bit of grass on some fairly barren terrain, and yeah, it's looking quite nice. Seems to you know, suit the model, and I've very deliberately allowed some of the dry brushing from the base to splash onto his feet so that you know, it looks like he's actually in this environment and, you know, been around there for a little while, starting to get a bit dirtied up. And yeah, really pleased with how he's turned out actually, really like the colour. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this scheme something you might do? And what else would you like to see me paint? For various reasons, there might be a few more painting tutorials coming up on the channel soon, because, you know, got to do something while I'm stuck inside. So yeah, see you all again soon. Bye.